Welcome everyone to today's Monash Software Systems and Cybersecurity seminar. Today we are very happy to welcome Ghada Almashaqbeh, who is an assistant professor of computer science and engineering at the University of Connecticut. Her research spans cryptography, privacy, and system security with a large focus on blockchains and their applications. And it's supported by NSF, Protocol Labs, and Yukon Research Excellence Award. Ghada received her PhD from Columbia in 2019. And before joining Yukon, she spent a while exploring the entrepreneurship world. She co-founded Cash, a startup that came out of her PhD thesis. And she was a cryptographer at NewCipher. Ghada is also affiliated member at the Connecticut Advanced Computer Center and Engineering for Human Rights Initiative at Yukon, a scientific advisor for Sunscreen Tech and the Mellon, and a 2023 Foresight Institute Fellow. Yeah, Ghada, thank you very much for agreeing to give a talk. The scene is yours.
Thank you so much for the nice introduction. And again, thanks for the invitation. Let me share my slides. Yeah, I guess all of you see my slides now.
All good, thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, again, thank you for the introduction, the invitation, and please feel free to ask questions anytime. It actually makes the talk more interesting. So today I'm going to tell you more about our work on unclonable polymers and their use in cryptographic applications. This is a joint work with Ran Kaneti, Yaniv Erlach, Jonathan Gershoni, Tal Malkin, Itzhak Pierre, Anna Reutberg-Perman, and Iran Tromer. I want to mention since the beginning that this is an interdisciplinary research project. We have a diverse team of cryptographers, computational biologists, and biochemistry experts. To start, imagine that we have memory devices that are unclonable. Furthermore, when you retrieve the data or the stored data from this memory device, it will self-destruct. Moreover, if this memory device stores several messages, only a few of them can be retrieved before having the memory device fully destructed. Such bounded query memory devices can be useful in several applications. Among them, I would want to mention the bounded execution software, which are programs that are either secret or they hold some secret data. And you want to execute this program over only a few inputs. So this problem, we know that we cannot solve it using software alone. Basically, you can copy a software program or data as many times as you wish. And it was shown, whether it is in the classical model or even in the quantum model, that you need 1 out of 2 memory gadgets in order to build bounded execution software. This idea, okay, it seems that this, oh, now the slides is back. So this idea was put forward by Goldwasser, Kalai, and Rathblom, where they showed that you can use garbled circuits combined with one-time memory devices to build k-time or one-time programs for any general functionality. In their work, they assumed the existence of the 1 out of 2 memory gadgets, which is basically you store 2 secret messages inside the memory gadget, such that the recipient can receive or can retrieve only one of them. So if you pick the message at bit 0 or the message at bit 1, then you can retrieve only one message. After that, it will self-destruct. They only mentioned some high-level directions of how to build these memory devices, which are basically based on tamper-proofing a whole computation and using trusted hardware. This trusted hardware, besides trusting the manufacturer, also they are subject to the assumptions that they resist side channel attacks, reverse engineering, and so on. all of these problems motivated us to look for an alternative technology to build bounded query memory devices. In order to do that, we joined forces with top-notch and brave biologists to look into the field of biochemistry and see if we can find an alternative technology there to build these physical devices. So our goal was to build real-world bounded query memory devices from minimal and more well-understood assumptions, rather than saying trust some piece of hardware and put all these strong security assumptions. Also, we wanted to do that in a rigorous way, laying down foundational study of modeling these devices and analyzing their security guarantees. Also, we introduced several amplification algorithms to allow using these weak memory devices in more advanced cryptographic primitives. So this quest was inspired by recent advances in DNA-based data storage, where basically you can take any digital message and encode it as a sequence of nucleotides. Then you will take that sequence and synthesize it into the DNA material. So basically, you take the digital message and you transform it into DNA material. And to read that message, you will reverse the process. So you will take the DNA material, discover or sequence its construction to get the sequence back, and then decode it to get the digital message. Don't worry about the biological details for now and even for the rest of the talk. Just keep in mind that you can transform digital data into DNA and do the other way around. However, DNA evolved to be clonable. So given a sequence of or a sample of a DNA, you can clone it as many times as you want, which means that you can also read the message stored in that DNA as many times as you want. So basically, we cannot use DNA for building bounded query memory devices. For this reason, we looked into another biological polymer, namely proteins. And similar to DNA, you can store digital data in the form of proteins by doing kind of similar approach. You take the digital message, you encode it into a sequence of amino acids now, which are the basic building blocks of proteins. And then you take that sequence and synthesize it into the protein material. And here the magic started. For starters, proteins are unclonable. The central dogma of molecular biology states that once information has got into a protein, it can't get out again. So the genetic information represented by a protein material cannot be reconstructed or retrieved from that protein. This challenge or hypothesis is still standing for almost 65 years since France's hypothesis, and even it's standing for billions of years of evolution, because until this minute, we didn't figure out a way, or biologists didn't figure out a way to copy proteins that are given in small or microscopic amounts. And to us, cryptographers, this is just like a biochemical one-way function. Given the genetic information, the DNA, it is very easy to use it to synthesize or build protein, but the other way around is hard. And as cryptographers, we know what to do with hard lemons. We just transform them into lemonade and use them as hardness assumptions or problems to come up or to build secure cryptographic primitives. Another amazing feature of proteins is that reading a protein is destructive. So which is kind of like doing it the other way around. Given a protein material, you wanna know the sequence of the amino acids of that protein material, then you need to feed a pure enough protein sample, and please keep that purity factor in mind, to the mass spec machine. And that mass spec machine, in order to tell you or to determine the protein sequence, it will destroy all the chemical bonds between the amino acids in that protein, which is basically, it will destruct that protein sample, and you cannot get that sample back. So combining these two, if you think about it, you have a protein sample that cannot be cloned. And whenever you want to retrieve the data stored in that sample, you have to use this destructive machine. Then this will imply a notion of bounded query. So that material will be enough for only a few number queries or data retrieval queries, which is kind of like the thing that attracted us to pursue this path. So based on these observations, we developed a protocol to build what we call consumable tokens. So as before, you take the digital message and you represent it as a protein material. And then that target protein that represents the message, we connected with another shorter protein string, which is called a header, such that that header is recognized by the matching antibodies. So in a way, think about it like this protein M is the secret message, and this header, which is also another protein sequence, is the secret key. And in order to retrieve this message, you need the antibodies, and you will see why in a few seconds. After doing that, we mix the target protein with a massive set of decoy proteins, each of which is connected to another different random key. And all of these proteins, they have similar physical and biochemical features, so you cannot tell them apart from the protein that represents our secret message. So the vial that contains the mix, which our co-author Anna is holding here in this figure or in this photo, represents the consumable token that contains the secret message. And of course, this is the protocol that we use to store the data or to create the token. We need another protocol to be able to retrieve the secret message out of the token. So this protocol is basically composed of a purification step in which you apply the matching antibodies to the secret key that is tied to the protein or the target protein. And this will allow pulling down the target protein representing our message from this random mix. Why do we need to do that? Remember, I told you that mass spec doesn't operate or needs kind of purified protein sample in order to tell you what is the underlying structure of the protein. And if you feed that machinery with a random mix of proteins, the output will simply be nothing. It will not be able to operate on random mix of protein signals, and simply the signal of the secret message will be lost. So to avoid that, you purify the protein first, and then you feed the pure sample containing the protein representing the secret message to mass spec, who will tell you the sequence of the amino acids representing that protein, and then you can decode that sequence into the message or the secret message that was stored in the token. And of course, before feeding that to mass spec, you need to cleave the header. And in a sense here, you can send the description of the header to the recipient as a digital information, because it is just a description of the sequence of the amino acids. And knowing that sequence of the header allows you to synthesize the protein representing that header. And using that header, this will allow you to raise the antibodies that match this header if you don't already have them. So the secret message is the physical vial containing the protein sample. The key can be digital or biological. It depends on the flavor of the application that you're looking at. But either one is fine. And once you know the description of the header, you know the matching antibodies, which is or which represent the secret key for us. So also using this
can
protocol.
I ask a question?
Sure.
Here? So I'm trying to see if I understood correctly. So we have a protein, we somehow insert a message into it, right? And then we insert a header, which kind of acts like a key. And there's a matching antibody, which only kind of, I guess, attaches to that protein or that particular header.
To the header, exactly. Yeah.
And then so, we are making many copies of the protein and the header, and somehow it's not possible to distinguish them, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't say copies because these other proteins represent other random messages and other keys. So
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so they are identical in the physical features. So any other data retrieval attempt that, I don't know, by looking at the proteins and try to isolate them will not succeed, because all of them, you cannot tell them apart, but the actual messages they represent, they are very different.
I see. So unless you know or you apply the correct antibodies, you will not get the correct message. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. The only way for retrieving the data is applying the antibodies. Any other technique that you can think of will not succeed.
Okay. And can I also ask, so this key, if somebody kind of tells you, okay, this is the kind of like the, I don't know, like the sequencing of the key, then can you create the antibodies just by knowing the, okay. So just the digital information is sufficient. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. So, and the biochemical procedure to do that is just, I don't know, what we learned back in biology, back in school. Some rabbit will be injected with the header protein, and then its body will develop the matching antibodies, and then you can take these antibodies to just like do the data retrieval in this way. So it is this mix of digital and just like biology in a sense, where all these terminologies, even when we started talking to our collaborators, just like, it was a little bit difficult at the beginning because everything to us will be translated to secret messages, keys, attackers, and so on. And in their world, things are so different. So that was kind of like the matching from their world to ours.
And can I also ask one more thing? So if I see this kind of like collection of proteins, can I see all of their headers and create antibodies for all of them and then extract all messages?
Okay, wonderful. So this is your question.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. These are amazing questions. So yeah, exactly. We extended the previous protocol to build what we call a partial retrievable memory device, where instead of storing one secret message, there are these secret messages. Each one is tied to a different key. So meaning that the protein representing message 1 will be tied to header 1, and header 1 needs particular antibodies 1 in order to grab the protein representing M1. So even if the attacker knows all the keys, all the headers and the antibodies that are matching these messages, that attacker will be only able to retrieve up to N messages where N is less than V. So for this, we call it partial retrievable memory. And the reason behind that, every time you apply the antibodies to the sample, you are destroying part of the sample, because whatever these antibodies grab, let's say it is the protein of M1, it will also grab kind of like a little bit of every other protein in the sample. You feed that to mass spec, it will destroy it. You cannot get it back. And every time you retrieve a message, part of that token will be consumed. So after N data retrievals, the whole token will be gone, and then you cannot retrieve the rest of the messages. So you have to pick in advance which messages you want to retrieve. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. And there are kind of, I guess, biological methods to have this targeted selection, or?
Yeah, so the antibodies, and this actually what allows us even to reduce the quantity of the rest of the proteins, because the antibody, it has, or they have the high specific parts and the low specific parts. The high specific will target, for example, if we're talking about M1, will grab almost the most of the quantity from M1. The non-specific parts will get a little bit of every other protein in the sample, but it will not impact the purity with respect to mass spec. So every time you do this operation, the rest of these proteins also will be reduced in value.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, we have this protocol extension, which is in a way, you can think about it, it is selective memory. Even if you know all the keys, you cannot retrieve all the secret messages inside that token. And after retrieving up to n messages, the whole token will be gone because it has been consumed. So based on that, we define what we call 1NB consumable tokens, where you decide the number of messages that you want to store in the token. And you have to provide keys where each key will be attached to a different message. In terms of biology, this will be the proteins and the protein headers. For us in the mathematical world, you are just looking at a vector of messages and a vector of keys, each of which is of size V. Then the honest party will be able to perform only one data retrieval query. So this honest party will provide or will pick one of these keys, and she will be able to retrieve the message corresponding to that key. The adversary on the other side will be able to perform up to n queries. And after that, he cannot do anything else. So as you see, there is a gap or a power gap between the honest party and the adversary. And we do that just to account for the fact that maybe there are powerful adversaries out there with more advanced biological devices that can operate at lower thresholds and lower amounts of the sample. So we know the honest party, we know her power, so we will design the token to allow this honest party to perform only one data retrieval query. But we cannot guarantee that maybe there are these powerful adversaries out there, and these adversaries can perform up to n queries. For this, the name 1n in the consumable token, just to say that, okay, one query for the honest and up to n queries for the adversary. So this actually makes our memory gadgets or memory devices weaker than the idealized 1 out of 2 memory devices. These idealized tokens, if you think about it, they represent an interactive version of oblivious transfer that allows you to pick one of 2 messages without interacting with the sender. In our case, unfortunately, this power gap, which is inherent, we cannot we cannot guarantee that, which is the 1 out of 2, because all the time the adversary is able to perform up to n queries. Regardless, this is still very useful and realistic memory device, and we were able to use it in several applications that I will discuss 2 of them today. So our formal modeling can store, which is basically, we developed a formal model for the protocol that we were able to get from biology. And we wanted to assume the minimum on the biology side and try to amplify everything on the cryptography side. So our model, we can store only a small number of short messages using short keys. So if you have a long message, then you have to divide it into several messages and store each one in a different token. The only meaningful interaction is by applying keys or antibodies. This is also enforced by the design of the token. Any other technique will not succeed in isolating the target protein or being able to sequence it without using mass spec, which is self-destructive. Also, each retrieval attempt will consume a part of the vial, as we mentioned, and we account for powerful adversaries by introducing this power gap with respect to the data retrieval queries. Lastly, this token supports non-negligible soundness error. And we had to include that in our model to account for the fact that in real life, it could be the case that you are applying antibodies, not the correct ones, but they are close enough to the secret antibodies in terms of their chemical and physical features. And there is a chance of gamma that the adversary will be able to retrieve the secret message, although he or she is using an incorrect set of antibodies. So for this reason, we account for that using this soundness error gamma, which is non-negligible, just to say that, okay, yeah, there are some keys that are similar to each other, although they are different. So as you notice, we are building weak memory devices that can store constant or provide constant size storage. And we asked the question if we can amplify these memory devices, can just make them stronger, so we can use them in more advanced cryptographic primitives, and we want to do that in a rigorous, provably secure way. This took us a long journey. So after spending months and months just trying to understand biology and designing this protocol and make sure that it works and it makes sense, in order to build all this rigorous modeling and security proofs, we needed to represent biology in some form of a mathematical model. To do that, we first introduced what we call the vector model, where we look at the protein vial as a vector of protein amounts, and the index of each component in this vector is the key that is attached to the protein, representing whatever message at that index. And we represented or we modeled all the biochemical procedures and processes that are being done in the wet lab as algorithms operating in on these vectors. So for example, purifying the protein or applying the antibodies, we look at it as, okay, now we decrease the amounts of particular proteins based on the antibody and just like take it from there. And of course, we also include now the non-negligible soundness error, and we defined what we call affinity database, just to represent the closeness relation between the keys and whether they are similar or not, and whether there is the non-negligible soundness error and so on. Then based on that vector model, we defined an ideal functionality representing consumable tokens, which is the one in the consumable token, with clean interfaces showing how to create a token, what is the input, what is the output, and how to interact with that token, how to retrieve the data. And we formally proved that the vector model that we have represents, realizes this ideal functionality securely. Still, this ideal functionality has non-negligible soundness error. To deal with that, we developed several cryptographic and algorithmic techniques to amplify that soundness error to negligible. And so this allowed us to use the consumable token in more advanced cryptographic applications. I have to mention that in the two applications that I will discuss today, the amplification procedure was application dependent rather than something generic that can be easily applied to the consumable token and use it in any application. So maybe one of the open questions that we have is how to come up with a generic amplification procedure that will work regardless of the application where you will use these consumable tokens. Is there any questions before we start looking into the applications? Okay. So in this paper, we show two applications of consumable tokens. The first is digital lockers, and the second is one-in-time programs. Let's start with digital lockers. So a digital locker is basically encrypting a secret message using a low entropy key or a human-generated password. Such that this locker is only susceptible to brute search attacks. And Kennedy and Dakduk back in 2008 showed how to build digital lockers in this way. So any attack other than just like searching the whole password space and try to decrypt the message will not succeed. So we asked the question if we can build digital lockers that also resist brute search attacks. So it is non-interactive way of locking the information such that the adversary cannot try more than in passwords. In general, in the web model, we do that by having some trusted server that will keep a counter. And if you try more than, I don't know, 3 passwords, then it will lock you out. But again, this is interactive. There's another party and so on. And digital lockers that resist brute search attack mimic that in the non-interactive setting. So in other words, in more cryptographic terms, digital lockers are basically a bounded query point function obfuscation, where this point function has a multi-bit output. So the function I, it is parameterized by the password P and the message M. When you evaluate that function over a password P prime, if it is identical to the secret password, then you will get M back. Otherwise, the output will simply be bottom. So this, or the ideal functionality of bounded query point function obfuscation, we modeled that using this ideal functionality. And the merit is the honest party who knows the password P, one query is more than enough because she will query this function over the password that she knows and get the message back. But the adversary who doesn't know this password will be able to try up to n password guesses. But after that, the ideal functionality will stop responding. And we want to build this application using consumable tokens. And you might say, wait a second, even the model that you described is very similar to the consumable token that you built. So simply encode the message M or store the message M in a token, and the password map it to a token key, which is this header space and so on. And basically, you are storing only one message there. By the security of the consumable token, the honest party will be able to try only one key or one password, while the adversary will be able to try up to n passwords. However, this is not true because our consumable token has a non-negligible soundness error. So the probability of A to retrieve the message is supposed to be n over the size of the password space plus some negligible value. But in using the consumable token, it will be plus some non-negligible value, which will violate the security bound that we are after. And even in this case, you might say, okay, this is also easy. There are all these secret shared-based approaches that allow us to amplify non-negligible errors into negligible ones. So basically, share the message M using additive secret sharing into U shares and use the password to generate U keys instead of one. So you will have several mapping functions instead of one. And then create U tokens, send them to the adversary, send them to the recipient. And here to retrieve M, the recipient has to operate over all tokens instead of one to retrieve all the shares and reconstruct the message. So this usually works under one condition, that the keys are independent. Unfortunately, in this application, the keys, they have some relation, which is being produced or generated using the same password. So you can imagine that if you succeed with one token, just like, I don't know, you are so lucky and you were able to guess the key of that token, you can map it to the password, and this will allow you to generate all the keys for the rest of the tokens and win with high probability. So basically, this construction will increase the number of queries or data retrieval queries that the adversary can perform, which means that this will increase the number of password guesses that the adversary can make. So instead of just n password guesses, now this adversary has un password guesses. To avoid that, we introduced a trick to chain these tokens together and to enforce the recipient to work on the tokens in order. So you cannot operate on the second token before finishing the operation on the first token, because the first token will not only give you the first share of the message, but also a random string that you need along the password in order to generate the key for the second token. And the same kind of analogy applies to the rest of the tokens. Every new token, you need the randomness from all previous tokens and the password in order to generate its key and to retrieve the share. So in this case, the adversary now needs to guess this randomness, and this is coming from a large space. So the probability of guessing the randomness correctly is negligible. And this will give us the intended amplification, where now the advantage of the adversary to retrieve M is just trying up to n passwords over the password space, plus some negligible value, which is what we want. So this provides us with kind of like a password authenticated way of communicating between the two parties. So they only need to share this password. One party will transfer the tokens to the other, and the other will be able to retrieve the secret message using that password only. No other settings or other setup assumptions needed in this scenario. The second application,
Ghada, can I ask a question before you move?
Of course. Sure.
You mentioned that in each token we can only store a short message. Mm-hmm. Is it still long enough to store the randomness as well? Or? Because we are now storing message plus the randomness, right?
Definitely. So what I am hiding here is that we do that in the kind of like, I don't know, behind the scene. So although I'm representing this one as, the first token, the second token, but in reality, this token is also many tokens storing all the kind of like the parts of that longer message.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, but that's a great question. I even forgot to mention that. So thank you. The second application is a modified version of OneTime programs, or one programs or K programs, which is something kind of like in the middle. So you have this program with secret state. The honest party can execute it over only one input, while the adversary can execute it over up to n inputs. So it is kind of like middle ground between one-time programs that can be executed once and K-time programs that can be executed K times. However, the difference is that this version of K-time programs is based on real-world memory devices rather than kind of hypothetical ones, or even ones with these strong assumptions on trust and security. So we construct OneTime programs from consumable tokens, and you might guess that this gap that we have is inherent because we are using the consumable token that has this inherent power gap between the honest and the adversary. So the construction is a little bit involved, but I will introduce the idea at a high level. And of course, you can see the paper for all the details and the proofs and so on. But basically, we use a cute trick here. So we rely on obfuscation, which is pretty strong assumption. We obfuscate the program that we want to transform it or compile it into a one-in-time program, such that we add another condition to this program as follows. To execute this function over input X, we require another random message M that is associated to X to be presented to the obfuscated program. So it will check that, okay, X, fine. Do you have the message M that corresponds to X? There is this message. If that's the case, it will output f of X. If that is not the case, then the program will not output anything. And what we do to enforce this bounded execution property, we store the messages inside the token. And so to retrieve the corresponding message M to input X, you have to map X to the corresponding key and then query the token and get the message that corresponds to X. And just think about it. If this token stores only up to, let's say, 10 messages and N is 5, then the adversary can only retrieve up to 5 random messages M's that correspond to 5 inputs. And so this adversary can execute the obfuscated program over only these inputs. The rest of the inputs will not execute because simply the token is consumed now and the adversary cannot get the corresponding messages from there. So now this whole idea is, okay, yeah, once you retrieve a message from the token, it is digital, you can copy it as many times as you want. But guess what? This message is only good for one input. And re-executing the obfuscated program over the same input over and over again is fine. We don't care about that. What we care about is you can execute this program over up to n distinct inputs. And maybe a similar question arises here, which is, wait a second, you also told us that the token can store up to small number of messages. So if the function f has a large domain, then you cannot fit all the corresponding messages of all the inputs in one token. And to solve this problem, we use linear error correction codes to expand the domain of f that we can cover to something exponential, which is what we want in practice. And we do that as follows. Instead of mapping X directly to one key and retrieve the message corresponding to that key, we encode X and look at the code word of X, which is composed of omega symbols. And each of these symbols will tell you the key that you have to use with the corresponding token in order to get the corresponding message. So now the input X will be mapped to omega secret messages, or just like random messages retrieved from the token. And the obfuscated program now will take X, encode it and produce its code word, and then see if all the messages that you provided correspond to the code word of X. If that's the case, great, it will execute f of X for you. Otherwise, it will not output anything. We show how to set up the distance of the code in a way that, although now the adversary is getting additional biological material, which is omega tokens instead of 1, still it cannot retrieve more than n valid code words, meaning that this adversary cannot execute the program over more than n distinct inputs, which is the goal that we have. So the construction in the paper starts first with using VBB, virtual black box obfuscation, and then just like to show the construction and convey the idea. And then we show how to replace VBB with IO and what are the needed modifications to make this construction work with respect to the security proof. So again, this is the high-level idea using BBB. The actual construction is a little bit more involved, and it relies on I/O. In this work, if you think about it, it is more about laying down the foundations for a new idea, for a new innovative protocol, where both worlds of cryptography and biology are working together to produce a notion that we cannot have only using software. So we have these real-world bounded query memory gadgets. They are a little bit weak. Maybe, I don't know, in future works, we'll be able to bridge the gap between the adversary and the honest party and make them stronger. But nonetheless, we are happy with what we have now. We show formal proofs and formal modeling of taking physical protocols from the wet lab all the way to the math/cryptography world and start dealing with them as mathematical objects. These models, these protocols, still they are not like, oh, this is the final version, or this is the best that we can do. In fact, this is the first paper on this long-term project. Our future work is divided also into two things, on the biology side and the cryptography side. On the biology side, we are currently working on a sister paper to show the full biological construction and empirical results with respect to its efficiency, security, and even quantifying all the parameters of its design. And on the cryptography side, we aim to refine our model more. We made many simplification assumptions that we would love to relax to make the model stronger. And we are working on building more applications using these consumable tokens. So hopefully there will be something more in the coming few months or maybe year. So yeah, this is it. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm more than happy to take more questions now.
Thank you very much, Ghada, for your very interesting talk. Yeah, it's really amazing to see how these biological kind of problems, let's say, relate to cryptography and find applications here. Very interesting. Let me ask if does anyone have any questions, for example, from the room, T13? Now, while they get set up, I will ask a question. I kind of there seems to be some kind of like similarity with the quantum information computation, like unclonability, and also this like when you read, you kind of destroy the data.
Yes.
Have you also kind of considered, or have you looked into this? Like, do you also see any similarities?
Totally. In fact, we have a short paper under submission now that looks into exactly these two things, which is, if you think about it, these are two unclonability paradigms. We look at all the applications that were built using quantum under the notion of unclonable cryptography, and we see if we can build them using proteins. So kind of the conclusion was that these two technologies are incomparable. In some sense, the protein is a little bit stronger, and in other aspects, the quantum is stronger. So, for example, in quantum, you cannot build a bounded execution software just because of the notion of the gentle measurement lemma, and you can rewind the computation and restore the state. So still you need something physically that will physically destruct when you retrieve the data. And for this, even in the quantum model, you still need the 1 out of 2 memory gadgets. Proteins, on the other hand, they don't provide all the flexibility that you have in quantum, but still they provide this notion of the bounded query because of combining the self-destruction with unclonability. There is nothing like gentle measurement or something that you can rewind the protein to a previous state or anything of that. So yeah, there is a relation, but at the same time, I think they are more like complementary rather than one can replace the other.
Yeah, thank you. Are there questions from the room, Amin?
No question. I can see here.
Okay. Yeah, I think we actually have another seminar in the room. So I think for the sake of time, we may conclude the session here. But yeah, this was very, at least from my side, was very interesting. Thank you very much for the talk. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Hope to see everyone in the next seminar session. Thank you.
Thanks again.